The wind was cold that afternoon, as Mary Jenkins walked home from the grocery store with a small paper bag pressed against her chest. Inside were only a loaf of bread and a carton of milk, the last things she could afford until her next pension payment. The town had changed over the years, new faces, new buildings, but her small apartment at the edge of the main road stayed the same, quiet and forgotten. She had lived alone since her husband passed away 5 winters ago. She often said loneliness had a sound. It was the creak of her front door and the whisper of her empty hallway. As she crossed the street, a loud roar made her stop. A motorcycle had pulled over near the gas station. A young man stood beside it, cursing under his breath. His jacket was torn and one arm was bleeding slightly. He tried to push the heavy bike, but the front tire was flat. Mary hesitated, watching from across the road. He looked lost, the way young people do when pride and pain fight in their eyes. Finally, she walked over and said softly, "You all right, son?" He looked up, startled. "Mom, I'm fine, just ran out of gas." Mary noticed his trembling hands and the dark bruise across his cheek. "Fine doesn't look like that," she said gently. He sighed. "The bike broke down, my phone's dead, and I don't have cash until tomorrow." She looked at him, then at the small store across the street. Inside her pocket was exactly $10, enough for her medicine tomorrow. She stared at the bill for a moment before pulling it out. "Here," she said, "go fill your tank, get home before it gets dark." He froze. "Mom, I can't take that." She smiled. "You look like someone's son, and someone's mother would want you to get home safe." He took the money, hesitating, then whispered, "I'll pay you back, I promise." She laughed softly. "I don't need it, son. Just promise you'll do something kind for someone else when you can." He nodded, eyes shining with something like shame and gratitude. He pushed the bike to the pump, filled a small canister, and waved to her before driving off. Mary walked home slower that night, but her heart felt oddly light. She told herself, kindness always comes back one way or another, even if it takes time. The next morning she woke to the sound of engines thundering down her quiet street. She peered out the window and froze at the sight of motorcycles lined up for blocks. At least 50 of them, riders wearing leather jackets and helmets. The noise grew louder until one man stepped forward, taking off his helmet. It was the young biker from yesterday. He smiled up at her window and shouted, "Ma'am, we owe you a visit." She hurried outside in her old sweater, clutching her robe around her shoulders. The young man said, "Ma'am, my name's Jake. The truth is, when you helped me yesterday, I was on my way to meet my club for a fundraiser. You gave me enough to get there, and because of that we raised more than we ever expected. I told them about you, and we wanted to thank you." Properly, Mary blinked, confused. "What do you mean, thank me?" He gestured, and one of the riders rolled forward holding a box full of groceries. Another carried envelopes. Others placed flowers by her steps. Jake said, "We took a vote, and everyone wanted to help the woman who helped a stranger even when she had nothing. We fixed your fence, stocked your fridge, and that envelope. There has enough cash to cover your bills for a long while." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "I don't understand why Jake smiled, because you reminded us what real kindness looks like." The sound of engines filled the air again. But this time it wasn't lonely, it was music. 50 riders stood around an old woman who had given her last $10 without expecting a thing. She looked at them through tears and said, "I guess kindness really does come back." They all nodded, and one shouted back louder than the rest, "Not just back, Mom. It comes back multiplied." That evening, when the sun dipped behind the hills, the bikers waved goodbye, promising to check on her every week. Mary sat on her porch, the same spot where she used to sit with her husband years ago, watching the street come alive again. Her hands rested on her lap, trembling slightly, but her heart felt full. She whispered to the quiet sky, "You see, Henry, they still make good people in this world." From that day on, whenever someone in town heard the sound of motorcycles, they didn't close their windows in fear. They smiled, knowing those riders had found a new mother who had once given her last $10 and ended up rich in ways money could never measure. After that day, the riders didn't just vanish, they became part of Mary's life. Every weekend, she would hear the distant growl of engines and smile, knowing her boys were coming back. They fixed her roof, mowed her lawn, repaired the creaky porch swing, and filled her pantry every month. Mary would scold them gently, saying, "You can't keep doing this." and they would grin, saying, "Too late, ma'am, family tradition now." She learned every rider's name Jake. The first one who stopped by would bring his daughter along, who called Mary Grandma already. There was Pete, the quiet one who rebuilt her fence by hand, and Ella, the only woman in the group who made sure Mary's medicine was always stocked. Every person who had once been a stranger now sat on her porch for coffee on Sundays. One evening, Jake said, "Do you know what? You really gave me that day." Mary shook her head. "I gave you $10. He smiled. "No, you gave me direction. I was ready to give up everything that day, lost my job, didn't care about much. You reminded me what decency looks like." Mary looked at him and said, "Sometimes helping someone else saves us." Jake nodded. "Maybe that's why everyone's here. You helped one of us and we all came back to return the favor." Soon the story spread across town. Reporters came asking questions, and neighbors, who once ignored Mary, now stopped by with pies and flowers. One journalist asked, "Why did you give him your last $10? Mary laughed, "Because kindness doesn't check your wallet first." The article went viral overnight, and donations flooded in within weeks. A fund was created in her name, helping struggling seniors in the community. But Mary never saw herself as a hero. She still sat on the same porch each evening, waiting for the sound of those engines to return. For her, it wasn't about the money or fame, it was about belonging. When her birthday came, the riders surprised her with a new sign on her porch carved in wood: "Grandma Mary's Place, safe stop for all riders." Tears filled her eyes as she whispered to Jake, "Your mother must be proud of the man you became." He smiled. "Maybe, but I think she'd be prouder that I met you." That night, as the sun set behind the hills, Mary looked out over the line of bikes parked neatly by her fence, their lights shining like stars. She whispered to the sky, "I gave away $10 and got 50 hearts back." If that's not a miracle, I don't know what is. From then on, every rider who passed through town stopped at Grandma Mary's Place for coffee, a story and a reminder that one act of kindness can ripple through the world like the sound of engines on an open road. Years went by, and Grandma Mary's Place became a landmark in the little town. Travelers stopped there the way pilgrims stop at shrines, not out of habit, but out of gratitude. The wooden porch that had once creaked under loneliness now carried laughter. Every weekend, the sound of engines no longer startled people. It signaled comfort. Jake kept his promise. He and the riders came back again and again, bringing new faces and stories that filled Mary's heart more than she ever thought possible. One spring morning, Mary woke early to bake muffins. She could barely stand for long, but her spirit never aged. The air smelled of rain and hope. When the first engine rumbled outside, she smiled, knowing the day would be busy. Jake stepped up the porch. Holding a photo album they had made for her, inside were pictures of every rider she had helped and every town their kindness had touched. They had turned her story into a movement called 10 for Good. Each rider carried a small patch on their jacket, showing a $10 bill under a heart, symbolizing how small actions change lives. Mary ran her hand over the photo of the first day she met Jake. The same look of shock and warmth still showed on his face. She laughed softly and said to him, "I didn't even know how to use a phone back then, and now look at us, changing the world." Jake said, "You started it, Mom. We're just keeping the wheels turning." Months later, the town council invited Mary to a community ceremony. They unveiled a sign at the entrance of the highway that read, "Welcome to Ridgefield, home of Grandma Mary's Place, where kindness began." When she saw it, tears welled up in her eyes. She whispered to Jake, "I don't deserve all this." He said, "You gave when you had nothing. You deserve everything." When winter came, her health began to weaken, but she refused to leave her home. The riders visited more often, bringing warm blankets and hot soup. Jake built a small ramp for her wheelchair, while Ella read to her on the porch. Every visit reminded her that she was never truly alone anymore. One evening she looked at them and said, "Promise me one thing when I'm gone. Keep helping people, even if no one is watching." Jake took her hand and said, "You have my word, Ma'am." A few weeks later, on a quiet morning, the engines gathered one last time, not to wake her but to honor her memory. Her rocking chair sat empty, with a folded note resting on the armrest. It read, "I gave my last $10, but you all gave me my last years filled With joy instead of silence. Thank you for proving that kindness never dies. The riders stood in silence, then started their engines together, the sound rolling through the hills like thunder, not of loss, but of legacy. To this day, Grandma Mary's place still stands, the porch freshly painted, the sign still shining, and every biker who stops there leaves a $10 bill inside the old coffee tin by the door, a small promise to keep her kindness alive. Her story became more than local legend. It became a movement that crossed states, inspiring strangers to give, without expecting anything in return. And somewhere above those open roads where the sky stretches wide and endless, a woman's voice still whispers with a smile, "Keep the engines loud and the hearts louder." 10 years later, Grandma Mary's place had become a living symbol of generosity. The small house with its white porch and flower boxes stood proudly at the crossroads where travelers from every direction stopped to rest. The walls inside were covered with photographs of riders and letters from strangers whose lives had changed because of one small act of kindness. The original coffee tin still sat near the door, but it no longer held only $10 bills. It was filled with notes from people promising to do something good for someone else. Jake had kept his promise. He had turned Grandma Mary's story into a foundation that helped struggling families pay their rent, fix broken cars, and buy groceries. It was called the Mary Fund, and every year on the anniversary of the day she helped him, the riders gathered for an event they called Ride for Kindness. Thousands of bikers from across the country came roaring into Ridgefield, filling the streets with sound and color as the town that once slept quietly now bloomed with life. The mayor built a new community center next to the diner and named it the Jenkins Hall after Mary Jenkins. Inside a plaque read, "She gave her last $10 and received." A nation's heart. People came from miles away to hear her story. Children sat cross-legged on the floor as Jake told them how one act from an old woman who had nothing became a fire that never went out. The kids would cheer and run outside to place their own $10 bills into the tin, promising to keep the chain going. Jake never forgot that first day, the rain, the flat tire, and the trembling voice that had said, "You look like someone's son." He often told others that those words saved his life in ways he couldn't explain. One afternoon he sat alone on the porch, looking out at the road the same way Mary once did, and said quietly to himself, "I hope you can see this, Mom. You didn't just fix my bike, you fixed us all." The sun dipped behind the hills, casting gold across the fields as the riders prepared to leave. Each one revved their engine twice, the way Mary used to wave them off from her chair. A little boy standing by the fence turned to his mother and asked why. "Do they do that?" She smiled. "It's their way of saying thank you." As the sound faded into the distance, the wind carried with it the faint scent of coffee and the laughter that had once filled the porch. Jake stood and looked toward the horizon, whispering, "Your kindness still rides with us, Mary, and it always will." Years later, a new traveler on a dusty bike stopped by the house. He saw the sign, read the plaque, and smiled before taking a $10 bill from his pocket and placing it in the tin. He whispered, "Softly, whoever you were, Mom, thank you," then rode off into the sunset and somewhere beyond the clouds where kindness never ends. Grandma Mary smiled, watching the road that would forever carry the echo of her last gift, reminding the world that one small choice made with love can keep hearts beating long after engines go quiet. If this story made you smile, share it with someone who needs a reminder that accidents can turn into beautiful beginnings.